So far, we went through HTML, we went through CSS, right? And today, we are going to discuss JavaScript, much more deeper. In the previous exercise, like the one we have on the board, we were able to have a glance at what JavaScript is and what it can do. And today we'll try to go a little bit more further and try to know what JavaScript is, why it is important for us to learn it now, and why we even have to keep learning it forever. Okay. So after all this time we have been doing is just kind of playing, you know. This is the time to really start programming. Okay, this is the time to start programming. Because the thing is this, HTML and CSS did not allow us to make decisions. For example, could we decide, or in case the user comes from Ghana, let's do this, and the otherwise, let's do that. We could not make decisions. And programming is more about logically reasoning, okay? Programming is about logic, reasoning. If there's no logic reasoning, if there's no logic measurement, this can't be called programming. Because you yourself, as we said the other time, it's a step-by-step instructions given to computers. So if you have to give step-by-step instructions to a computer, you have to say, for example, go to the market, try to find me tomatoes, the raw tomato. In case you don't get raw tomato, you have to get me the tin tomato. You get that? So you see, there's this conditioning that happens when there is a procedure that we are defining, a set of instructions that we are defining. There must be conditions and other things. We didn't see such things with HTML and CSS. So that's why most people don't call them as programming languages. Okay. But JavaScript gives us that opportunity. And that's why that is our first real programming language. Right? So briefly, that is it. So what is JavaScript? The official name for JavaScript is ECMAScript. ECMAScript. ECMAScript is actually the standard which defines a programming language. I'm saying it this way. It is a standard which defines a programming language. So what it says is, okay, to write this language, to write a program in this language, do this, do that, do that. But how we implement that language differs from one place to another place. So sometimes you hear the name ECMAScript or ES. Yes, right? Yes. ES, ECMAScript. So you see ES5, ES6, so on and so forth. This is just to reduce some confusion. We will start very soon. I think I'm just warming you up. So ECMAScript, but the official name we know, you will see everywhere, is JavaScript. Okay. So all this now is just parenthesis. Let's go back to the actual context and understand why JavaScript finally. Because after all, with HTML and CSS, we can lay out websites. Why do we still need JavaScript in the first place? So, the first reason, like I said the other time, is interactivity, right? Interaction. With basic HTML and CSS, you can't interact too much with your web page. Like we saw the other time, we could handle on mouse overs, on mouse click, on scrolls and everything using JavaScript. But we can't do that with CSS. We can do that with raw HTML. So interactivity is important. The other advantage we could see, there are so many, but I just can't mention some because it won't make much sense for you now. For example, let me give you an example, networking. So what I mean by that, these are one of these topics I don't want to mention, but I'm just mentioning for you to realize the scale of the problem. So, networking it. Imagine when we wrote, we had one of these assignments where we actually created a contact form, but we couldn't send the message, right? So how do we manage to make the message go? So we need to do what we call networking. So the program, the form must be able, or the page must be able to communicate with a remote server and tell the remote server, okay, take this information and then forward it to this server as a message, as an email. You get that? So we have to be able to do such things, and HTML, CSS alone can't do it. So we need to call programming languages like JavaScript. You get that? And so many other things. When we go to this interaction alone, we have so many possibilities that only JavaScript can help us do that. Even other programming languages around can't do what JavaScript can do. The other thing is this. We'll come back to it. JavaScript is already in the browser. It's already in the browser. So browsers are automatically created, bundled with JavaScript in them. We will see why we are saying that right now. You understand it better. So which means basically if you want to start writing JavaScript code, all you have to do to start your browser and then it goes. So if JavaScript comes bundled in the browser, and we know that the browser is mainly used for website browsing, web document browsing, it means there must be a way for us to use that JavaScript from the browser and interact with our documents. Do something with our documents. So you see, JavaScript comes bundled with the browser means something for websites. There's a way that JavaScript might interact with the website the browser is actually showing. Or there must be a reason behind even thinking of having JavaScript already in the browser. So that's where, in order to understand that, we'll go through something, actually how programming languages work. Okay, how does it work? So far, when we're writing HTML, CSS, it seems that the browser just understands it. But how does it understand it is important. So this is what we are going to do. So for the browser to be able to read your HTML code and your CSS and other things, it means somewhere you have your document like this, your document, right? You have your HTML document, which is fed inside the browser. Right? But in here, what does the browser do? The browser has to read your document, interpret it, and display accordingly. So the browser has to do all this work. So the fact that the browser does this work, all this work is now encapsulated in one function that we call interpretation. So the browser does the interpretation of your HTML and your CSS. You get that? Now, in other programming languages, it is not being interpreted, just plain interpretation like this. For example, when we take a language like C, I don't need to mention all this, not necessary. Okay? In other ways, you hear the term compile. So to make it simple, sometimes you hear the term compile, compilation of your code. Okay? So ignore that. Let's think of interpretation. So it means there's something here that is in charge of this interpretation, and that thing is called the engine. It is called the engine, like the engine of a car. It does all the thinking and the hard work, and the results are perceived outside. So your document goes inside the engine of the browser, and the engine does the interpretation. So the same thing with JavaScript. Every time your browsers, you send a file through your browser will intercept it or read the file. During the read, when the browser sees that, there's JavaScript somewhere in your file, or you link the JavaScript file, the browser will take that JavaScript file and send it to a JavaScript engine, ES engine. And the ES engine will interpret the JavaScript and send it back to the browser. And the browser now does the display for you. You get the idea? So when the browser realizes that there's some portion of JavaScript in your code, it will take off that JavaScript, send it to another engine aside the browser engine itself that is in charge of the HTML and the CSS, and send it to the JavaScript engine, and the JavaScript engine will be able now to interpret your JavaScript code and now apply the actions on your page. Are you getting that concept? And that concept of we having the JavaScript engine close to the browser's engine itself is what I call here the JavaScript is embedded in the browser. The engine that is in charge of interpreting JavaScript comes with the browser. That's why browsers are automatically places where we need to write JavaScript. That's why browsers are automatically places we need to write JavaScript. Right? So it means at the same time that the browser is not the only place we will write JavaScript. You see, with JavaScript, things are getting a bit complicated. Yes. It is important that I clear that on the way so that wherever you go, because we don't have much time, wherever you go, you don't get confused about why is it I would have JavaScript here and we were supposed to have it in the browser. You know, the browser comes with JavaScript engine in it. All of the browsers automatically are bundled with the JavaScript engine, which means you can write JavaScript code and these browsers will understand it. Okay? So, and I was saying, it doesn't mean that the browser is the only place where we can write JavaScript. There are other places we can write JavaScript. Okay? And one of these places is called Node.js, which is another JavaScript engine, but which is not inside the browser. Okay? So sometimes, over time, while you are searching JavaScript, reading about JavaScript, you will see this name show up. And recently, another name called Dino.js. Okay? So these are various engines that are not part of the browser, but that can also interpret JavaScript. And you have many of them. I think even software like Photoshop has JavaScript embedded in it. So which means JavaScript can go everywhere. That's the beauty with JavaScript, and that's the second reason, fourth reason why we need to learn JavaScript. So let me call it portable. So it is everywhere. So the reason why we are mentioning that is, imagine you create a website, and then when you are willing to host it, you are willing to post it online, you realize that where the server on which you are going to put it cannot read your JavaScript or something like that. That would be a problem. But when we realize that, anywhere we put it, it is just going to work. After all, JavaScript is going to work from the user's browser, not necessarily the server. You get that? And then with Node.js, we can even take JavaScript to run on the server instead of running on the user's browser. That makes it very beautiful. So basically, we call it usually the front end and back end. The front end is when you do the interface of your website and the user's browser. But the back end is a server on which your website is hosted. Some operations can be performed on that server before the website is sent to the user who is visiting your website. So basically, let me brush on that. This is how websites work. You see, this is your PC, right?
Yeah.
And when you type www.google.com or so, your PC will send a request, a demand, right? It will demand to your internet service provider, I want to access a website called google.com. Actually, through your router. It's through the router your PC is going to make this request. And then your internet service provider will connect to the internet and find a particular machine on the internet which contains the files. You remember, we create files to create websites. Those files are kept somewhere on a particular machine which is also connected to the internet. So the internet service provider will try to find that computer that is storing the files of this website, google.com. And once it finds that server, it will send a request to the server and say, okay, somebody is requesting the files of google.com. Would you mind to send it back? And then the server will respond back with the details, and then your internet service provider will route it back to you. And now once your browser receives it, your browser will do this reading interpretation and then rendering it and displaying it appropriately. You get that? So actually 2 computers are in charge of displaying a website. At least 2 computers, because it can go more. So your computer makes a request, I want to see John Doe's website, John Doe's profile. And the machine on which the site is kept, the files of the site, okay, yeah, I do have it. It's actually located inside my documents. Then boom, these are the files. And then we start sending them one by one. And then once my browser starts receiving it, it will start interpreting it and reading and displaying it, respecting the norms of HTML, CSS, and then giving me a nice display. So now, that being said, what I was trying to say is that it means we could say, let some operations be done here before the site is sent. Okay, so that's what I was trying. Since we have 2 machines, the browser actually has the JavaScript engine. So we could just send the raw JavaScript from our files, like the .js file. We could send that .js file straight to the browser, and the browser's engine will be in charge of interpreting it. But I was saying, it is possible that we could ask the server here, now interpret that JavaScript file and send us the result instead. And that's what Node.js and Dino and others do. I understand. You see why I was scared of tackling this topic. It's really a tough one. Okay? Yeah. But in all this we are saying, what I want you to understand, to keep in mind, is the fact that the browser has something that knows how to read JavaScript. It's as simple as that's the main thing you need to keep in this whole talk. This whole useless talk. Keep in mind, JavaScript has the browsers have something in them which allows them to understand JavaScript language. It's as simple as that. Now, once we know where JavaScript can be run, we can start writing JavaScript, because that's the most important thing. When we started HTML and CSS, we need to find out what can read our HTML. We found out it was the browser. The browser knows how to read HTML. When we also started CSS, we knew that the browser too knows how to read CSS. So now we are discovering that the browser knows how to read the JavaScript language as well. So it is time for us to jump to it and see how it goes. All right? So let me get rid of all this. It was just a whole long talk, huh? Good. So because I was mentioning the browser to have an engine that knows how to interpret JavaScript, that's why I added this bracket information, that there are other places where JavaScript can also be run, not necessarily only on the browser. No, there are other places. So that's it. For now, we will not focus on these other places. We care about the browser, because if we want to use other places, it means now we have to bring those places. We have to install them, and that's a long procedure, a long process. So we'll only focus on the browser. The browser does it all for us already. So it means you can create a website, an entire website, just using your browser, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you won't need anything. So you can imagine, for you to use your browser, you don't need permission from Pentagon. You don't need permission from KGB. You don't need permission from any Israelite intelligence or so. The only thing you need is power. Turn on your computer and sit down and do it. And that's why I have hope that in Africa, we can still do so much. Because we have the power, we have the freedom to be who we want. Use this browser and be who you want. It's your choice. Why do we think we are limited? You see that? There's no limitation. Alright, now let's see, where do we write that JavaScript? We saw the other time we could inline JavaScript with our HTML, right? We could inline JavaScript. We could also embed it like we did with our CSS, and we can have it as an external JavaScript file. Okay, and we tried to do the inline JavaScript the other time on our A tag. So we did A tag on click. So we use the attribute on click to call in JavaScript. So the value of on click must be JavaScript. You get that? So we saw that this attribute on click can help us bring JavaScript. Just like the attribute star helps us to bring CSS. Right? The attribute star on any tag allows us to bring CSS in. So the attribute on click also allows us to bring JavaScript in. But the JavaScript here will run only, will be executed only when the user clicks on this link. So it means once the page loads, the browser will not interpret the JavaScript here. The browser will keep it quiet because it will happen. This JavaScript will only run if the user clicks on the link, the related link. You get that? Okay. So if we go back to our source code, look at it. Let's start next segment. Okay, so this is the work we did, and this is where we use the JavaScript. So this is it here. That's the attribute on click, and that's the value we gave to the attribute. So that's the attribute, and this is the value we gave it. So just like HTML, where we had to learn tags, various tags, in the HTML case, it was a matter of tags, and we needed to discover many tags. And then when we got to CSS, it was a matter of functions that we need to discover as well. So the same thing happens with JavaScript. But this time around, we don't only have functions, we have much more to discover. Functions are just one part of JavaScript language, because as a logic language, it will require so much tooling to achieve what we want, to achieve logic. For example, we need if statements, right? We need to be able to make if statements. If I am young, I must work. If you do this, you have to do that. Otherwise, you have to do so and so. You get that? So we need this if statement in order to make decisions. So in JavaScript, not only we have to learn function, but we also need to learn if statements. We also need to learn other things such as long as you are young, you must always go to work. You see, this as long as or as far as, you know, the while statement. W-H-I-L. The while statement. We need to have such way of speaking. We also need to have a way of saying, for all of you in this class, any of you who is less than 5 years, do this. So we need to find these 4 statements as well. For every young person in this class, I want to see your back. I want to do this. So you see, we have these structures we have in the language which help us define a behavior at a certain point, or once a certain condition, a set of certain conditions are satisfied, then we execute something. So we have to also have this same statement, this same constructs in the JavaScript language to be able to perform logic. So for example, this and that, John and Jane must be in the class at the same time. If John is sick or Sister Ifia is sick, then we don't have class. You get that? So in order to achieve this logic, the language needs so many constructs. You see, so many constructs. So over time, in learning JavaScript, we have to learn as many as possible constructs we can, and then how to use them. So one of these functions we discovered was just the alert function. And the only thing this function does is to pop up something on your browser, and what it pops up is what you put in here. So this is a case of a function. At the same time, not only we have to learn all these constructs, we also have to be able to operate mathematical operations such as addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, modulo, and so on and so forth, because JavaScript Engine automatically has a calculation integrated in it, a calculator integrated in it, that will allow us to say, okay, if we have 20 tomatoes and we cooked 10 yesterday, how many will be left? It's logic thinking, right? How many will be left? So the possibility of knowing how many is left is to make the 20 minus 10. So JavaScript must be able to interpret this minus. So these mathematical operations, JavaScript must know how to do it. So these are the things we have to go through to learn. We have to learn them step by step in order to be able to write JavaScript. So we'll start with one of the basic steps in JavaScript. Okay? So what we are going to do is this. So this is one thing. To actually experiment some of these things, okay, I want us to do to test two things. One, we will need to find out that JavaScript engine in the browser. We need to discover it and see where it is and how we can write. In order to see it, you do right click on your browser like this. See? Just do right click and you see something like inspect. That's Apple. I don't know how that is done there. Maybe we're able to see something like that. Let me Google it and see. Let me Google it. So I'll go to inspect. Safari, right? Enabling web inspector on Safari. You have to enable it. So choose Safari preference. So open Safari, go to preferences and click advanced. At the bottom of the pane, select the show developer menu in menu bar checkbox. What? Seriously. So we go to advanced, show developer menu in menu bar. So you enable it. Good. So you get, you see inspect element. So click on that inspect element. Right. So you see something shows up. Complicated. The only thing we are concerned about is this one, console. With this console, we can now be able to talk to that JavaScript engine inside the browser. Okay. So we can be able to feed it with JavaScript. So you see two ways of using it. We can inline the JavaScript. We can also use the console to interact with the engine. But the interaction through the console does not stay on the website. Once you reload the page, whatever you wrote there will disappear. So this is more of like testing interaction with the engine, okay? But the real use of JavaScript has to be either inline, embedded, or external with your page. That's the only way you can link JavaScript to your web page, okay? So we go to the console is actually for us to be able to discover how JavaScript actually interprets some of these structures, right? So let's go ahead to the console again. So while we are on the console, right, write the same function we wrote here, alert. So you write it the way we wrote it on this. So just alert, and then in quote, you put something inside. So we'll do alert. And then inside I'll write hello world. Right? and we close the bracket and we add semicolon. Can you see on my screen? Can you see? Yeah. So once you are done writing that, press enter on the keyboard. So you see something pops up. The same thing we got inside the browser pops up here. So you see, we were able to interact with the engine. So let's clear that. So once you escape, you can press escape key or just close the pop-up menu. And you can see the cursor is coming back and getting ready for you to write any other instruction for the engine. So the next instruction we are going to write is to test if JavaScript can actually do the calculation like we said. Does the engine has that calculation brain in it? So let's do the 20 minus 10 and press enter to see. You got something?
It's 10 equals $2.
Let me see. So, hey, why $2? No, it's not $2. It's actually a symbol for something we will discover right now.
Okay.
It's called a variable. I think so. So I don't know what Safari does about that, but I guess that's it. Okay, so it's just considered a 2. And think of only the 2. Okay, so you see, the engine has that capability of calculating. So let's think of something. We know that when it comes to calculation, we can have 2 consecutive operations occurring. For example, we bought 20 tomatoes, right? And yesterday we cooked 10, and we are left with 10. And then this morning we used 5 inside again. So it means after this operation, with this first operation, right? So let me call this operation I, and I will say equals to. So the first operation, I'll call it I, right? I is equals to the 20 tomatoes of yesterday. I mean the 20 tomatoes we bought, I don't know when, and then minus the 10 we consumed yesterday. So after that, today we are going to use out of the remaining 10, 5 again. So let's call this operation J. So the operation J is going to be the 10 gain from this operation. So 10 minus 5 again, right?
Yeah.
And then here we are going to get 5. So you can see that it seems, if we talk of I, we could say I contains 10, right? The operation I gets 10. Here we could decide to remove the 10 and just replace it with I. Because we know inside I, it is 10. So I becomes like a box. A box containing the 10 inside it. So this kind of boxes which contains temporal information which can be used in next operations are called variables. That's what makes a programming language, one of the things that make a programming language very powerful. So we can make an operation contain the result in a small box, and in the subsequent operations we can use the content of that operation. You get that? Are you getting me?
I think so.
Sure. Right? So here we said I, we call it I, and then once we do the operation, whatever the result, we call it I. So it's like we stick to I, the value 10, or the value of the calculation. So we kind of marry the two, right? And they represent each other now. If we say I, we are talking of the result. We might not even know the result. But wherever we see I, we know that it's the result of the 10 minus, the 20 minus 10. It doesn't matter what it gives. So if you want to use that result, we don't care. We can still say I. So I minus 5. Whatever the result of the operation I gives, that's what we are going to get here. In our case, 10. So 10 minus 5 is going to be 5. So how do we do that? So to create such kind of boxes in JavaScript, right, we use the keyword var. Okay, so like a variable, right? We want to declare a variable. You use a keyword var, then you give a name to it. So in our case, we give it a name of I, right? So we say the variable I, and we give to it. We give to it 20 minus 10. 20 minus 10. Right? So you can enter semicolon. If you want, you can. If you don't want, don't mind. JavaScript will not mind if you don't put the semicolon.
Okay.
Right? But it is important to have the habit of using it, just like we did with CSS, to always mark the end of one function or one instruction. Okay? It makes it clear to read. So we entered that. So we are saying, okay, we are declaring a container, a variable container called I, right?
Yeah.
And inside that I, we are entering the value of 20 minus 10. So if we press enter, oh sorry, I have a syntax error because I pressed full stop. So it says undefined, right?
Yeah.
Actually, ignore that undefined. It's JavaScript's way of saying, okay, I have nothing else to do. I did the operation, but because we didn't ask him, show us the result, it won't do anything. So to see the result, all you have to do is press the I and enter. JavaScript will show you the result as 10 down there, right? So the I now contains 10. We could see it. The engine is showing us that the actual I has now 10 inside it. So let's go ahead and create the next container, which is the J, right? So I'm going to say var j equals to I minus 5, right? And then let's press enter to see what we get. We get undefined because we just made the operation and we didn't ask JavaScript to show us the value of j. So to ask the JavaScript engine show us the value of j, we press j and we enter. And it gives us the 5. So I now has the value of 10 and j has the value of 5. So we can continue using this I and j in the place of 10 and 5 like that and continue. So this is called a variable. It is important in your operations, and let me give you a real case where these things are important. Take the contact form we created back then. When the user enters, writes his name, we have to keep it somewhere. We keep it inside a variable. When the user enters their email, we have to keep it somewhere. So now, let's check this one again. Let's see something. Let's make a condition. Let's reason logically. So let's say, if I, which is the I we created, right? We know that I has the value of 10. If I is less than 10, okay, we will write alert. We will say alert I is less than 10, and we close the quote and we close the bracket. Let me go. Let me reduce the zoom a bit for you to see the line. So you see, don't worry, okay, just watch me. The rest you will understand it later. Else alert I is greater than 10. What do we get? I is greater than 10 as a result. So this is what happened. We try to use this if instruction in JavaScript, and this is how you use the if statement. It's true, I always find it difficult to introduce this kind of languages to people because there are certain structures we just can't shortcut them and simplify them. But in the case of if statement, think of it as a human way of making the if statement. Okay? If you are sleepy, so we say if you, right, are sleepy. If you are sleepy, then what do we do? What do we do? Go to sleep. Right? So think of it in human terms. You can even remove this bracket. So if you are sleepy, go to sleep. Okay? That's how humans formulate if statements. So in this programming language, what we do is we say the if, and then we put in bracket the condition. So which is the condition here is the sleepy. I'll come back in details on those things if we get a chance to have a class again. Okay. I'll come back. It's because we are in a hurry. I want you to see certain things. That's why I'm just jumping things like that. So we write the condition here. And once the condition is satisfied, so if this condition is true, happens, okay, so which is in your case you are sleepy, then we execute the statement here. So the statement, we get it executed here. You see that? But instead of just us to write it like this, because we can write many statements, we encapsulate them inside the curly braces, just like we did with CSS. So many go to sleep, or we can say stand up and go to your bed, lie on your bed and sleep. So you see, so many statements can come inside here. That's why we put them inside the curly braces, right? So that's why I use the curly brace here after the if statement. So the condition here is this. It's a mathematical condition. This time around, it's not if you are sleepy, but if the I we actually created up there, which is a container that has 10 in it. So I'm checking, is the content of the I less than 10? Strictly less than 10? No, because we remember I has 10 inside it. So 10 cannot be less than 10. 10 is equals to 10, right? Mm. And 10 cannot be greater than 10. So 10 is equals to 10. So this condition failed. I is not less than 10. 10 is not less than 10. So if the condition fails, so yes, we say I is greater than 10. Yeah, it's wrong, yes. I would have said I is equals to 10, or greater than or equals to 10. It might be greater or equals to, but we don't know. So if the first condition fails, else, so we use the else structure to verify the failed condition. So in case the first condition fails, if you are sleepy, go to sleep. In case you are not sleepy, else, in case you are not sleepy, so we use the curly braces too because we know we can write many statements inside. So you see, the thing is the if and the condition, and then what happens if this condition is satisfied, and what else happens in case the condition is not satisfied. You get that? And that's what this means. So if the condition, will do whatever has to be done. In case, else, if the condition fails, what should we do? So that's how this if statement works. Just like in normal human interactions. But how we write it is different. And all this way of writing JavaScript, we learned how we write CSS. CSS has its own rule, which is the function and then column and then the value. And this kind of way, this unique ways of writing every single language is called the syntax of the language. It's like the grammar of the language, like the English grammar. Okay, so this is JavaScript grammar for the if statement. It might vary from one language to another. Okay, but this is how you write an if statement in JavaScript. Right? Good. So far we have seen JavaScript can do this operation. JavaScript can check conditions, right? So what if, while we can check it while it rains, stay home. Right? While it rains, stay home. So it means as far as the rain is still falling, don't go anywhere, stay home. So how do we write that in JavaScript? It's quite easy. So you write the while term like this, and then in the bracket you write the condition, which is it rains, right? So let's say in my case, we are saying I want to use something. Okay, let me use something here. While rains, okay, and then in curly braces. So while rains, what should we do? So we say here, alert stay home. Okay, so that's how you write that. So while the condition is satisfied, the condition now is rains. Okay, while it rains, we alert stay home. So basically, if this condition is satisfied, we should see the alert pop up, right?
Yeah.
As far as the rain is still falling, the alert will be popping up and popping up. Stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home. And that is what is used in, you can think of it as an alarm in the factory. So while the fire is burning in the factory, the alarm should continue saying, wing, 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 right? So this is for a while loop. Okay? This is a while loop. It loops, it loops, it loops, it loops. It turns in circle as far as the condition is satisfied. Here, if you press enter, it won't do anything. JavaScript will tell us, the engine will tell us there's a problem with your statement, something is wrong, because it doesn't recognize this range. Where is the rain coming from? We didn't declare it as a variable somewhere. You get it? So it must be either a variable or some mathematical operation that it can operate and check the condition there. It doesn't know rain as human beings do. So we have to find a way of satisfying this condition. So if I press enter, I should get an error. Yes. So it says uncaught error, reference error. Range is not defined. So JavaScript says, I don't know what you call range. What is range? Yes, I am doing that in order to give you a glance of at what I'm trying to say here. So in our case, I want us to do something. Okay? I want us to see, to look through the content of I, which means we will be removing, we'll do this. We'll display like, we know I has 10 in it, right?
Yeah.
The variable I has 10 in it. I want to be able to display 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. I want to be able to do that. So I want to go through each one of the steps inside the I value. So we could say, while the value of I is still less than, it's still greater than or equals to 10, or should we say, let me think, what condition should I write there? Is less than. You see how conditions can become difficult.
Yeah.
When it comes to logic, but this should be not fine. I just have some brain issues here. This should be a common condition. So I want to be able to go through the value of I. So as far as I is not empty, so I want to be emptying the content of I. Okay? I want to be emptying the content of I. So I'll start by emptying the 10. Then I'll empty the 9. I'll empty the 8. Right? So as far as I is still greater than or equals, it is still greater than 0. So as far as I is greater than 0, so which means as far as the value inside I is not empty, because if it is 1 inside, 1 is greater than 0. If it is 2, 2 is greater than 0. If it is 3, 3 is greater than 0. If it is 9, 9 is greater than 0. If it is 10, it is greater than 0. So I'm saying as far as the content inside is greater than 0, we will log. So we'll use a different function. Console log. Console log. I believe we'll have to come back and see all this, the I, and we close the loop. So let me write it on the board for you to see. So here I'm saying, instead of rain, I'm saying as far as I is greater than 0, okay? And then I'll use a function called console.log. So don't mind that function for now, okay? We'll come back to it. And then once we need a console.log, I have to remove something from I. So I'll go ahead and say I minus minus. Don't worry about this. I just want you to show, I want to show you a little bit how we can use a while loop. Okay? Good. So here it is. So you see, we are saying as far as there's still something inside the I, display everything inside the I. So you see, it shows us 10, 9, 8, 7. So it will do that. It will go inside I and take every single number and display it. So as far as we still have numbers inside the variable I, continue to take them out. And at the moment there is no number anymore, stop. So this is how a while loop can be used. You get that? So it gives you an idea. I think I'm just brushing this in order to kind of awaken your senses on some seriousness coming ahead. Right? So the same thing with the for loop. This one will not bother to talk about it now because it's more complex, it confuse you more. So the same thing happens. It's just like the while loop. It's like for like we define like, okay, it is going to be a loop, but we define a condition just like we did with the while loop. But this time around, how we write the condition is different. You won't understand it right now because of this. Here I did something. You see, I defined the condition and I also used something here. If I don't, if this function says, okay, remove the element you displayed already. So if you display 10, remove 10 out of it. If you display 9, remove 9 out of it. If you display 8, remove 8 out of it. That's what this does. So basically with the for loop, we are going to write the same thing, but this time around in one line. So that's how it works with the for loop. But it's a bit difficult to do. So good. The end, all and other things, we'll come back to them. But this is just to give you a little bit taste of what we actually speak of when we are talking about JavaScript. Good. Now we need to bring the ball on the ground. We need to bring the ball on the ground so that so that you'll be happy. Because we are talking of websites. Where does this go? How does this involve, how does this relate to websites? Okay, let's go back to websites.